Okay, and it is 7:01. Welcome to Eviction Ending a Tenancy with Bad Tenants. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Nelda Schulte, and I'm joined by the handsome and clever Gil Donkersgoed, who is my husband. And we also, oddly enough, owned a real estate business, property management business together called Calgary Dwelling Consultants, which we moved into an online business called neldaschulte.com in 2020. And we also own our own investment properties, which we've done for over 15 years in Alberta and BC. And oddly enough, I was even a contract worker for RECA, the Real Estate Council of Alberta, at one point. So we have a little bit of knowledge here with real estate. And tonight we are joined by our very special guest, Donald Gray from Edmonton Eviction Services. Would you like to say hello, Don?
Hello, Don. You say special, is that like a Special Olympics or?
Special guest. We don't even have a bus for you, but we do have a category, so you are the special guy tonight. Who's my special guy? It's Don. Don is special because he's got a real estate investing background of his own properties, and he also ran a property management business for 20 years. So he has kind of a similar background to us, but the main difference between Don and us is for kicks. After he retired, Don decided it would be super duper fun to start an eviction service. And so he started Edmonton Eviction Services, which is just piles of fun, Don. I'm actually really looking forward to hearing your stories from the trenches tonight.
You don't have all night, so I'll only tell you.
Well, your story's within an hour. This is our second of six Ask Nelda Almost Anything questions about our live sessions about real estate investing, landlording, that sort of thing. And tonight, as I mentioned, we're talking about evictions. And tonight's topic works really well for people who've had bad tenants and they want them to go away, or they've got good tenants, but they're kind of worried that maybe at some point in the future, you might have to evict somebody. And if that happens, what the heck are you going to do? So that's why we chose to talk about evictions tonight. We're going to walk you through the process from the Residential Tenancy, or not the Residential Tenancy, from the RTA, the Residential Tenancies Act standpoint. And then Don's going to walk you through the process from the eviction specialist standpoint. There's a good difference between the two of them. Depending on what you want to do, you'll choose the one that's right for you. And I think that's probably all I wanted to say for my intro. So I can move to my next slide. Oops. Right. As mentioned, I'm on neldaschulte.com, and I've got resources for landlords and property investors. Some are free. Most of them are free, actually, at this point. It looks like I misspelled my name here. It should be neldaschulte.com. You can also find me on Twitter at Nelda Helps Me, and I have a private Facebook group called Landlord Knowledge Network where you can post questions, and you're in a very supportive environment, and people will answer them in a nice way. And if they don't, I kick them out. So our goals tonight are we're going to outline the process by the RTA for ending a tenancy if you want to do this yourself. And then Don Gray is going to outline the eviction process from the eviction process service standpoint. Tim, I'd like to welcome you for joining our session. Thank you for joining. Nice to see your video. I'm sure there are others who don't have a video on. Welcome. We're very happy you're here too. So tenant responsibilities. The reason I'm going to talk about this is because before you can oust anybody, you need to know what your responsibilities are, what the tenant responsibilities are, how that all fits within the legal structure, how the RTA sees it. So the tenant responsibilities are to pay the rent in full. So yes, they do have to pay you every month in full, not interfere or disturb the landlord's employees or the other tenants. So no loud crazy parties or harassing anybody. They can't do illegal acts. So they can't be doing drugs, prostitution, or anything else that's illegal. They can't do anything that endangers anybody in the building or the common areas.
Right. They can't cause significant damage. I mean, you're going to have wear and tear, but causing damage is a whole different thing. They must maintain and keep the property reasonably clean, and they must vacate the premises once the tenancy is ended.
Right, and tenancies, that brings us to fixed and periodic leases. And Don said that this was a really important part of the eviction process. So Don, I'm going to let you take it away.
Well, it's a very important part of rental. Periodic tenancies are easy. You don't have to worry about them. They go year to year to year to year. You got a good tenant and life goes on and you use the same lease over and over again. The problem with the periodic tenancy is that there are only 4 basic reasons to terminate a tenancy. One is, or 2 involve sales, the sale of the unit, and that comes from when the conditions are removed. So it has to be sold. And certainly it can be difficult to sell a place with a tenant in it, and especially if it needs a little bit of work and that sort of thing. You're in a paradox there. You can't really fix it up and to sell it if the tenant's in there, but you can't really kick the tenant out if they're doing everything correctly. The other 2 are basically, one is if you're going to do something different with the place, you're going to make it, I don't know, a grocery store or a storage unit, or you're going to demolish it. And the last one is if a relative or the owner himself or herself is going to move in. So that's the ups, the good side and the downside of periodic. Fixed term is one I prefer myself. I stick to that with all my units. And that's simply because if you have a tenant that's, I'm going to say mediocre, that, is not doing anything wrong, maybe they're paying on time and they're paying in full, but they're a pain in the patootie, or they're calling you every second day that, there's too many earthworms or something. We had that once.
Oh, really?
Yeah, too many earthworms. There was a heavy rain, too many earthworms. Please come and pick them up. Okay, we'll get on that. Your out is the fact that at the end of that lease, you can just say, I'm not renewing. Don't have to give a reason or anything. Section 15 of the Residential Tenancy Act, we'll call it the RTA. It says, and I'll paraphrase a little, it says that the tenant is expected to leave at the end of a fixed term tenancy unless prior arrangements have been made. And if they go past the end there, and I mean, it doesn't say that you have to give them notice, but certainly
That's the right thing to do.
Yeah,
you should.
yeah.
And
Just as a courtesy, yeah.
And if we're going to court because somebody hasn't left, we're going to, for overholding, which is item G, and the vacate on the last slide you had there. The judge would ask, well, did you tell them you weren't going to renew? I mean, there's no reason, there's no requirement for you to do that, but the proper thing would be to have told them.
Right.
And I mean, we're still going to win the case because they are overholding, but you may give them extra time to get out. So sometimes that doesn't mean anything. Sometimes it means a lot. So that's the basic 2 things. The other part, of course, is rental increases on a fixed term. You're not going to increase the rent till after the term. So if you got a 2-year term, you're stuck at that rate until the end of the term. Whereas periodic, you give 3 tenancy months notice and for the increase. That's
but I think with the periodic, you can only do 1 increase a year, right? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah.
Once every 365 days.
Yeah, 365. Yeah. Yeah, I know landlords who will just sign a fixed term lease of 6 months with new tenants. They see how they're working out. If they don't really like them very much at the end of 6 months, they give them notice 2 months prior and say, we're not going to be renewing your lease, just heads up, your lease ends at noon on whatever date month. So that kind of gets them out without having to do too much finagling.
Yeah.
I've known other people who have raised the rent after 6 months. They'll say, if there's someone they really don't like, they'll say, be happy to renew your lease for a new term at a rate of $250 more per month. And that frequently gets rid of people too.
That's called eviction, economic eviction. Certainly in tough times, I've done 3-month tenancies, fixed term tenancies, to get me over a hump over Christmas, over the winter or whatever. If what's coming in is slow and not of good quality, then I'll put somebody in, but put a tight leash on it.
Yeah, good stuff. So you mentioned, Don, that the tenant ledger was really important when you're evicting.
Yes, that's the judge is always looking for that. The majority of our cases evolve around non-payment, or non-payment as part of it. We do get certainly do get cases that the rent's up to date and there's no problem that way, but they're doing or not doing other things that are requirement. But in any case, the judge still wants to know what's going on with the money. And my experience is that most landlords, especially if they have, I would say, less than 5 units, tend not to keep a ledger. If you get more than 2, they tend to have something on their computer or in a file showing where the money has come in whatever way into their bank account or through email transfer. You might have the email transfer slips and that sort of thing, and all that's fine, but we need to know that money is there, and that we're being honest with that. And so when we do a case, what can hold up putting in the application is getting that ledger ready. Now, if it's not, certainly if it's not involved in money, then we can get that case in and have the ledger follow after. But when most of the time there's money missing, money short, we have to show how much that's going to be on the application, and so that'll hold up getting it in, and we want to get that filed with the RTDRS just as fast as we can, so we get the earliest possible date. Once we have the date, then we can certainly do all kinds of things, but getting that date is the important thing.
Okay, I didn't realize that you had to produce a tenant ledger. That's the first I've heard.
Yeah, that's actually news to me too.
Yeah. So is this something formal, or is this something you can just download?
Well, it's in the application package. You can use the one, if you're doing it yourself, you can use the one that's in the package and put in the dates. We have a template in not Word, Excel. Oh. Getting late for me. It's getting late now. Yeah. So we have a template in there that we can plug the numbers into, and we get the result at the end. And so the judges like what we produce, and it's very easy for them to read. Most of them, anyway. Some of them can't do 1 and 1, and so you have to point out why it's only 2.
Yeah, so we have to mention that RTDRS judges are different. Are they called judges?
Yeah, they're adjudicators.
Adjudicators, yeah.
They have the same powers as a judge, but only on the Residential Tenancies Act and the Mobile Home Act.
Right. Yeah, so you're not actually getting somebody who is
a
legal expert.
Yeah, a lot of them are lawyers.
They're civil servants.
Quite a few of them are lawyers. There's one in there that's a former prosecutor. He retired from being a provincial prosecutor to doing this as a hobby, I guess.
Okay, all right. Because I hear all kinds of varying things about who sits behind the desk or the bench there. So yeah. Anyway, interesting. So the tenant ledger aside, there are different kinds of rent notices that you can give to tenants. So I'll do an overview in a little bit, but Don's going to walk us through the 24 hours, 14 days. There are a whole bunch of them. You can get the
Yeah.
forms. You can get the forms in different places. We'll talk about that later.
Well, rent notices, there's all kinds of notice, certainly, rental increase and the notice of entry, 24-hour notice entry. For the eviction side, there certainly is a 24-hour eviction notice. Now, some people don't realize is that 24 hours is the time that they have to leave. So it doesn't count the day that you
Right.
serve it or the day that they're supposed to be out. It gives them 24 hours to get ready and go out. So it's really a 3-day notice. Same with the 48-hour. 48-hour notice is for tenants that are, I'm going to last year. I'll go back to the 24-hour notice. That 24-hour notice is for when there's violence involved. So
Right.
somebody took a swing at the landlord. I had one where the guy beat up his girlfriend in the front lawn.
Yeah.
All kinds of stuff like that. I've had where some guy took a hammer to the inside of the house and it was caught on film. So those kind of things. So it's violence orientated. I had one that threatened people with a gun, and ironically, part of his ID was a gun license. So we were able to do quite well with that guy.
Yeah, I got you.
And then the 48-hour notice is for when there's unregistered occupants. So you got somebody there that is not on a lease. I've had in place where guys did a midnight run and somebody moved in, the place was empty, or their buddy told them, say, hey, come on, move in here, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
And so that's a 48-hour notice for unauthorized occupants. Then the most common is the 14-day notice, which of course is 16 days because you don't count the day that you serve it or the day that they're supposed to be out. So it's 14 days in between. And if in the 14-day notice, if the tenant writes a notice or a objection letter,
Yeah.
I'm thinking here, objection letter, then that nullifies it unless it's about money. If it's about money, they can't write an objection letter. In any of those cases, any of those three, it's not enforceable. So in Alberta, the only one that can enforce an eviction is a bailiff, and of course the police, but most times the police don't get involved. RCMP might in a smaller town, but it's a bailiff, and the bailiff won't go unless it's a court order. So if you go the 14 days or the 16 days and the tenant goes, then you have to go to court. And that's the process there to that. So that's the basic ones. I mean, you can put up a notice of abandonment. That's another thing. If somebody abandons and you put up a notice of abandonment and how they can get a hold of you and stuff like that. But the actual ones stated in the RTA are the 24-hour, 48-hour, and 14-day.
Great, for all specific reasons. Okay, great. So I'm going to give you a scenario here. So this one's
Okay.
kind of a typical scenario. Lily seemed to be like a really nice young lady when she applied. She had a good tenant and work references, of course. And her credit wasn't great, but she told you she was a student, she needed a break, she needed to live someplace nice near university. And you thought, well, my daughter's in university and she's about the same age as my daughter. I think I'm going to give her a break here. So she's been with you 3 months. She's never paid on time. Every month she's paying later. This month she told you she paid for 1 week by Friday and the rest of the week at the end of the month. She's got a different cry story every time she talks to you. At this point, you don't believe the thing she says. You're like, oh God, here we go again. You're getting really agitated because you're not seeing the money and you don't want to keep going through this every month. What should you do? Where should you start?
Okay, well, there's another name for her. It's Mary No Pay. She's related to some cousins. Anyway, to me, this would be an opportunity for what I call retraining a tenant. Now, if everything else is okay with this tenant. You know, they keep a neat place. You know, you don't hear from them. There's a little problem, they get hold of you and you fix it and all is grand. So if everything, if it's only money, then I'd like to, and I've done this quite a few times in the past. I did it a lot where I kind of developed it was when I had the property management company. And so it actually works better with single mothers or fathers. But so I always went through the usual series of things. So I'd give them a written reminder, you know, that your rent is late. So that's, I phone them the first month, say, hey, you know, what's happened here? And they legitimate excuse or whatever, we get worked out. Second month, I do a written one and say, you know, this is unacceptable and must change. And then the third month in a row now, I may give a 14-day notice, but I may not. I may just go straight to court. I might not even say anything. And I serve them right away. But what I do different is after I've served them, after I wait a day or two, so let this sink in, let them get over the anger. And then I call them and say, you know, if you really want to stay, if you want to talk to me a little bit, and we'll go see if there's a way we can help you. You know, a lot of times when they're faced with the fact that they may lose the roof over their head, it sinks in that, you know, I'm in trouble, and they're in a pickle. So I talk to them and we go over. Once we get going, they get trusting me, I tell them for sure, you know, you need to talk to me. You need to tell me the whole truth. It's not going to go anywhere else. And we go through their finances. We talk about how much money comes in, where it comes in from, and when it comes in. And then we look at their expenses. And you wouldn't believe how many times we found some money there. You know, I had one that liked to have 3 lattes a day. What was it, $6 a pop or something? And that added up pretty good at the end of the month. And $180 actually at the end of the month. So then we work out a deal where now they've got the money. They figured out where the money is, because when we're doing their budget, we're putting rent first, food second, you know, that sort of thing. And so now they've got an idea of where the money comes from. We're basic stuff that should be taught in school and isn't.
No kidding.
Yeah. And so then we work out a deal where the rent's paid on time going forward. And it's a bit of arrears they got. Maybe they're half a month or maybe a whole month behind. And we worked that over 5 or 6 months. You know, if it's $500 and we can pull out $100, well, we're going to pay that over 5 months. And then at the court, we do what's called a Cinderella order. We put it in a court order. We have specific dates, a time that they have to have it by. I usually like to do noon. A lot of people do 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock or midnight, and that's fine. And then the beauty of that is that in the court order, then the repercussions are if they're $1 short or a day late, I can serve them with what's called a notice of default, because they defaulted against the court order.
Oh, okay.
The specific amount of time to leave, I ask for 2 days from the service. So if I serve them on Friday, they got to be out by Monday. And if they're not, I can have the bailiff come in and remove them. And so that drives it home. And I tell you, I'm going to say 80% of those that once they agreed to it, I didn't force them. I talked to them about it. We worked through it. They agreed. They saw where the money was. They took ownership. And then it turned out to be good tenants. I'd say about 80% of them. Some use to buy time because they're going to move anyway. And others just, you know, they fall off the wagon. And you have kind of both worlds, because I mean, it costs a lot of money to get a new tenant. Advertising and all that kind of stuff. So if we can save the one, and all other things being equal, we can save that one, then that's what I recommend, and that's what I do, and I've done it with mine.
Well, that's really great. Actually, I've never heard of anyone who re-educates people. So kudos to you for doing that, because that's a very good-hearted thing to do, but you're not being a duppy here. You're being very firm. You put in a court order and you said, here's the date, here's when you have to pay it. If it's not done, these are the repercussions. You got to be out in 2 days. So you make a decision about what you want to live with here. So I think that's great. And then you're helping them with their budget, which maybe no one's ever done with them before.
Exactly right. And you know, the single mothers and fathers are the ones where it works the best, because usually the other partner, the one that left, was the one that had the money and
Right.
was looking after things, and here they're lost and they're trying to grease the squeaky wheel. Whoever's asking for money, they'll give them some.
Yeah.
And this organizes them.
Yeah, well, that's great to know. Yeah, we actually had a single father who lived with us for a while in a rental suite, and he was always late.
He was really
He was a
bad.
very nice guy. He had he was a great dad, great kid. But we talked to him, I don't know how many times. I don't really know what the problem was, because he never went out anywhere. He never did anything. It's not like he flashed.
He had a nice
jewelry or-
truck.
He had a really nice truck, but I had no idea, but he had a good job. You know, it looked like he could afford it, so I don't know where his money was going, but not any of my business, and he's no longer with us. We parted on pretty good terms at the end. We had a few discussions, and he decided to leave, which actually worked out best for all of us. So I think, yes, we like to take some questions. If there are questions that the audience would like to ask, now's a good time to ask. I also have one. I have one from, Tim, if you'd like to ask a question, fire away. Or maybe your poodle wants to ask a question.
Yeah, he's a cutie.
He's pretty cute.
He'll talk. Don't give him the chance. I did have a question actually about buying a property, and I read something about having an open tenancy, forcing the existing owner to end the tenancy of the current tenants and having them to reapply with me once I buy. Is that it doesn't sound ethical to me. And
So you mean you're buying a property that already has a tenant in the property from the previous landlord?
like a triplex kind of thing, and then you ask for open tenancy and have the existing tenants reapply with the whole purpose of just raising rent.
Oh,
So the first challenge you're going to have is if they've got a lease, they've got a lease. So you can't end the lease until the end of that lease.
Yeah.
it's a legal document, so you have to honor the dates. Unless they agree to, you and they agree to other arrangements.
A fixed term, but you'd have to honor that fixed term to the end. If it's periodic, then you would have to give them 3 tenancy months notice from when you took over.
Yeah.
And again, as Don mentioned, there's only certain criteria that you can actually ask a tenant to leave for. One of them being moving into the property, one of them being demolishing the property, and there were a couple of other ones. But so you can't just say you're gone because I don't like you.
Well, yeah, that's it. Well, when I read it, my question was, I didn't think it was possible, and it didn't sound very ethical to me. Now, obviously, there's an upside to try and get more rent out of them, especially in this day and age where I'm in Ontario and rents have almost doubled in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So
I
you
don't
tenants
know.
that have been there for a few years, they're definitely under market.
I don't know Ontario's rules. We're in Alberta. I believe Ontario has rent controls, though, does it not?
Rent controls, I think it's coming in, or just came in. Did it not? Rent controls? How much you can raise the rent and all that sort of stuff?
Oh, they've had that for years. Yeah.
Okay.
The government will dictate the it's usually like 1.2, that kind of percentage each year.
Yeah.
It's
So the idea is that the tenant is then evicted, it reapplies and doesn't leave, but reapplies and it comes back in as a tenant under a new rate.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
if they're
doesn't sound
existing,
ethical to me either.
yeah, if they're
Yeah, it
existing,
doesn't sound
usually you
right.
can't.
I don't think that would work. You
No.
could evict the tenant and rent to someone else, and that sort of negates the rent control, but you'd still have to you'd have a hard time evicting the tenant for that purpose, because that's sort of specifically what these rules are trying to prevent.
Yeah. And
And
what
if they
about,
balk at it, your system of court there is takes you what, a year to get somebody out?
yeah, it's pretty long,
Boy, that is a long process.
not easy.
How long
it's-
does it take people to get into the RTDRS here, Don?
Well, normally throughout the year, it's about 2.5 weeks from the time of application to the hearing. Right now, it's a little longer because of summer holidays. A few of the judges are on holidays, of course, and the work doesn't slow down, but the people doing it are less. So it takes a little longer.
Yeah.
About 3.5 to 4 weeks right now down the road. Yeah.
Is,
Alrighty. Well,
and
that
do-
was a good question, though. So, go ahead. Sorry.
and doing a renovation, can you kick a tenant out in that case?
In Alberta, you if you're doing a renovations of such extent that they can't live there while you're renovating, you have to give them 365-day notice.
Wow, a full year.
Full year. And that's because so many people abused what we had before. It was the 3-month before, and the people abused it just to get the tenant out, and then they paint one wall and put it up for rent.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, you could say, apparently, I heard this from one of the bailiffs we talked to. You can say, I'm actually planning to move back into the property, and then actually not move into the property.
Yeah.
Like, you could indicate that your intention was to move into the property when you evicted them. I'm not sure how easy that is to get away with.
This part of the industry is governed by the Consumer and Corporate Affairs, and they are driven by reports or by complaints. So
Right.
if somebody was to write in and complain about a landlord, if they just got one, chances are they wouldn't do anything about it. They're very busy with all kinds of things. But if they got several complaints or complaints of severe nature, then they would do an investigation. I've been involved in a couple of those. I had one where the landlord was out of country. He was a terrible landlord. He didn't do we didn't repair anything, and the place was in bad shape, and he broke every rule that you could find. And he hired me to do the eviction. And of course, after I got into it, I found all this out. But anyway, the tenant complained to Consumer and Corporate Affairs. It was about, I'm going to say, 1.5 pages of complaints. And most of them were true. So I got a letter because I was representing them. I got the letter, and there was a, fill out the kind of like what Rika sends, fill out, answer these questions and return it. And we did that. And meanwhile, the tenant left, and we could put the property under control again. And they wrote back and said, ignorance of the law, it's one of the defenses was he didn't know the law. And
Right.
ignorance of the law is not acceptable. However, if you're going to continue to be a landlord, that in Alberta, that you need to know the laws, and if there's another complaint, we'll look at that very seriously. So we got a slap on the hand, is what he did. And no fines or anything. If they fine you, it starts at 1,500 and goes up to 25,000.
Yeah, it's pretty steep.
Yeah,
it's pretty serious.
You have to be, something. If you just did that once, and the tenant, former tenant, complained that we put it up for rent and you didn't move in, chances are nothing would happen. And if at the worst, they would ask you to answer these questions. So, I mean, you can always say that. I mean, if you're doing that just to get the property back, and you don't move in, you can always say, well, there was a change of plans.
Right. No, that's Alberta rules.
Whatever.
Those are Alberta rules. So I
Yeah.
guess what we're saying here is this is kind of the blanket overview here. You do want to check with the Ontario rules and make sure
Yeah.
that what you're doing is legal and ethical. Because you want to start out on the right foot.
And you don't want to piss off whatever the ruling body is.
No, because once you get on the radar, they're
yeah,
looking for you.
they're on you all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're mean enough as it is.
Yeah. So yes, I don't know if you caught the first part of the conversation. I used to work for the Real Estate Council of Alberta. They were nice to me, but I worked as a writer. So, but as a property manager, we got reported a few times because there's a certain amount of.
We started our real estate business as just tenant finders, which did not fall under the Real Estate Council of Alberta's purview, but we started getting reported anyway. We were able to convince Rika that we weren't doing anything illicit, but eventually we realized that if we wanted to continue our business, we'd have to get licensed and become property managers. As soon as we did that, we suddenly incurred like thousands and thousands of dollars of expenses. You had to take that education, you had to join a brokerage, you had to pay them most of it, everything you made.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, give me the money. Everyone's got their fingers in the pie.
Yeah.
And we had to deal with all the property management issues, which was not a wonderful thing, but that I digress. So back to evictions. If a tenant pays late, before you take any action at all, you need to ask yourself 2 questions.
So the first question is, if the tenant paid on time, would you want the tenant to stay? So basically, is it a good tenant with the exception of this late payment thing? And Don has already addressed that, and he's got some really good tips there. And the second question is, and Don's also addressed this, if I issued her an eviction notice, would she pay? And again, Don made the point that when it becomes real, they'll take it more seriously. But those are 2 questions. Like, do you want the tenant? Do you want to be pursuing them month after month after month, making them pay? And are they taking good care of the property, or would you be better off with someone else?
Yeah. So once you've answered that question for yourself, then you know what course of action to take. And then this is the summary of what you do.
Right.
According to the Residential Tenancy Agreement.
And I think actually Don
Act.
has gone over this in
Yeah.
pretty good detail.
Yeah, the
So
warning or
probably-
the phone call, notice of default, third-party demand letter. I didn't really talk about that. They mentioned this in the RTA. Don, do you issue third-party
Yeah.
letters as an eviction service?
We do this in the commercial side. We don't get a lot of commercial. I don't go after commercial, but we do that in the commercial side where you do a demand letter and then follow through, give them like 10 days and then you go and change the locks. But that's a whole different kettle of fish. For here, the demand letter is basically your 14-day notice is a demand letter. What I find is if you're doing all these steps, you're wasting time. There's delays. If it's not going to pay, then you're just making it longer and you got a bigger bill at the end. You want to reduce mitigate your losses. Yeah.
So what's the fastest way to get rid of a bad tenant? So let's say you answered, no, I don't want this tenant. I want them out. I'm going to call an eviction service. What's the process for an eviction service?
Well, with us, what we do is we start off with a contract. We have what I call a letter of engagement, so you can engage our services, and then from there we gather the information. So we need your lease agreement, your tenant ledger, you have one, or the list of payments and dates and amounts. We'll make the ledger. Any emails, text messages, notices, letters, pictures, if it's about damages or cleanliness, that sort of thing. If there's police involved, if we can get police numbers, and they're awfully hard to get any information out of, though I have had a few that have stuck their neck out and been very instrumental in helping get rid of really bad tenants. And anything else that you'd have that would be toward what goals we have, whether it's to evict or to re-educate or whatever it is we're going to do. So once I get all that, then we make application to the RTDRS. We get the okay, usually within a couple hours or so. And they send us then the hearing date and the cover page, and of course, that little 5 pages of tenant rights that we need to give them. And then we put the packages together along with the application and all the evidence, and we call it what's called a notice of hearing package. And that is, we then serve that to the tenant. Now, my philosophy is to serve the tenant as soon as we can. First off, we want to catch them unawares. I make sure I tell the owners that not to tell them that I've been hired, so they're not avoiding me when we serve them. And so we serve them. I put my card on the attach my card to the top page, and I tell them that if they got questions, phone that guy. They don't necessarily know it's me serving, or that, you know, I'm the guy on the card that's serving. Call this guy, and if you got any questions. And so then if they have questions or if they want to talk, then we have that opportunity between that time and the hearing. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. But at that point, I take over the communications for the landlord. The landlord gets a call, and they start hollering at him. They say, "Oh, don't holler at me, holler at that fat guy." You know, he's the one that's looking after it now, and you talk to him. And sometimes they don't bother phoning me. They know that I'm not going to be as easy as the landlord. And usually do that spot because the landlord's been too easy. But that's another story. So I follow that, and then at the date of the hearing, if we have a deal of some sort, we reiterate that at the hearing. Otherwise, we go through the procedure. We end up with a court order and a judgment. Now, there's 2 types of court orders. There's a conditional and an unconditional. And the unconditional means that their tenant's going to be out on a particular date and time, or bailiff removes them. The conditional means that they have to do something before they get evicted. If they don't do something, then they'll be evicted. So if they have to make a payment on by a particular date and time, that sort of thing. So that's the Cinderella order that I was talking about earlier. So then if they miss that, then there's another step that we have to serve them with a notice of default, and then the eviction part kicks in. So at the end of the hearing, we get this court order and judgment, and we file it with Queen's Bench, so it becomes a legal document, and then that legal document is served to the tenants. It's not quite as onerous to serve as the notice of hearing. Notice of hearing, you got to try and get it into their hands. Mind you, it's been loosened a little bit for over COVID here, but I fully expect it to be going back to having to serve it right in their hand. You can be with the court order. If they're not there, we can paste it on the door. You're supposed to try once, and if they're not there, you try again, and then you can paste it to the door. Then I follow up with the landlord as a rule after that, give it back to the landlord, and to see what they've done and what they haven't done, and if we have to do anything else. If we need a bailiff, they're not leaving, I facilitate that. I'm not a bailiff service. I'm not a civil enforcement agency. I do work with one that gives me really good prices, which I pass on to the owners. And that process then is followed through if we have to. And it's about 10% of the case. I do 35 roughly a month, and I do 2 to 4 bailiffs kind of on average a month. So about 10%.
So your whole process from beginning to end, let's say somebody contacts you and says, I want my tenant out. How long is this going to take by the time I hire you and the tenant leaves?
Well, I'm going to say most often it's 2.5 to 3 weeks to the hearing, and then from the hearing it can depend on what the adjudicator says. So the earliest I've had is 3 days from service. It was actually called it 2 days, but I had to serve, and we had to really rush to get everything done in place. So 3 days later, the tenant was out, and a lot of those, they know it's coming. They're already half out by that point anyway. And the longest, well, I mean, I've had where they had a year to pay back. So I'm on the hook every month, and for
Oh
that,
my God.
twice a month if they didn't pay.
Oh,
I don't. I mean, that's to me, that's part of the service. And 6 months down the road, they didn't pay one. Well, then I'll go serve them with the notice of default, and so yeah, I know there's two times a month as a rule. At the beginning of the month when the payment's supposed to be made, that if they miss that, then it's a notice of default, and usually later in the month, 15th or 20th, depending if they got children or whatever, then they're paying on the arrears, and so that's another opportunity for them to mess up and need a notice of default.
okay. So it's not so cut and dry. Like it could be anywhere from 3 weeks to sometimes a year to get somebody out.
Well, it depends what the goal is. If the goal is to get them out, I'm going to say usually within 4 or 5 weeks, they're going to be physically
out.
And that's for ones that need to be out.
Right.
They're damaging the place, or they're not paying, they don't care, they holler at you, they're destructive people. They need to be out. So yeah, I'd say usually, if there's violence involved, I've had it done in a week.
Yeah.
That guy with the gun, and the gun I had, that was 4 days. We had him.
Holy cow! Yeah. Well, and hopefully nobody got hurt in the process.
Nope, nobody got hurt.
So with the RTDRS, if we follow through the whole system as they outline it, it looks like it would take up to 3 months to get somebody out.
Yeah.
That is if everything goes according to plan. If the tenants pay or do something along the line that messes things up, you have to start all over again at the beginning. So I know some people who are very good at doing the RTDRS, serving themselves, doing that, and they can get people out fairly quickly, and they don't mind doing it. I, however, would hate doing that myself. I would hire an eviction service. I've never had
I'm glad to hear that.
but I wouldn't do it simply because it's just, when you talk about all the different steps, thinking about if you're filing with the Court of Queen's Bench, there isn't a lot of room for error. Basically, if I make a mistake on a document, I have to start all over again. So I would just hire an eviction service that knows what they're doing, knows how to do it, let them take care of it, get the tenants out, and then move forward.
And that's why I'm in business, because there's a lot of people that, you say government paperwork and their eyes roll over in their head and they start to shake. And other people are just so busy that they can't get that in, or they're out of province or even out of country. I've done lots of people in England and Sudan and all over that have property here, and that I've was able to help them with.
Well, that's good. Thank God there are services like yours around. So I'm just going to back up a little bit and just reiterate. So basically, there are really only 2 reasons that you can kick somebody out, evict somebody. And one of them is non-payment or continual late payment. And the other one is behavior problems like noise, disrupting neighbors, damage to the property, illegal activity. And I'm going to go over some of the letters. So this is a warning letter. And the reason I'm going through this is just if you want to create one on your own, this is what you need to put in it. You can also get warning letters from Calgary Residential Rental Association. Any of the landlord tenant associations that are municipal will have their own warning letters, 24-hour notice, 14-day notice. They have all of those. You can buy them in packages if you join, if you're a member. And I think probably most government organizations, landlord tenant government organizations would have them as well. I know Service Alberta has them.
Yeah, they don't really get into that because they don't want to be given advice, and that's kind of like giving advice. So, yeah.
So basically what you need on the warning. Okay, yeah. CRRA definitely has the Calgary Residential Rental Association, ARLA, the Alberta Residential Landlord Association has them. So the nonprofit municipal organizations that I'm a part of, that I always joined as a landlord, all have these letters. So if you need them, you can have them. If you don't, if you want to create them, You just have to make sure that you're putting the reason, like what the notice is for, like this one says notice of late rent, the date, the landlord's name, address, telephone number, the tenants who are listed on the lease and their address, what it's for, rent, like late rental payment. Then you have to set out the terms, be very specific about them within the body of the letter, and then you have to sign it and date it.
And again, this is Alberta rules, so you have to make sure that you know your own locality.
But for most, I think probably most letters, you just have to make sure you have pretty much the same thing. You need to have the title, you need to have the date of the notice, who it's from, who it's to, what it's for, the specifics, and then you need to have action if the action's required and the date of the action, such as the notice of default, and then you need a signature. Right, Don talked about the third-party demand letter. Well, actually you haven't. This is where you.
Confiscate possession. So that's a civil enforcement thing underneath the Civil Enforcement Act. And you would need a bailiff to help you with that.
For sure.
Yeah, I don't.
So how does that work? Let's say you've got Bob tenant in your property. Bob says he hasn't paid his rent, he lost his job, but you see him up partying and having people over and kind of generally being a bad guy. And the landlord says, I've had it. Can they hire a bailiff without an eviction to confiscate the goods to pay the rent?
Yes, they can. I've never had to do it on my own. I've chased some guys down and that sort of thing, but I know of people who have, taken a motorbike or a second car or something. You can't take things that they need in order to go to work or whatever. So if they got two cars, you could take one, but you couldn't take both. And I mean, you'd want to take the hot Mustang, but you may not be able
And
to.
isn't there a rule about if it's parked on the street, it's off limits?
It has to be on the property?
Yeah, well, the thing is with vehicles though, is there's another act involved and I forget what it's called now. But anyway, that governs the licensing and the removal and all that of vehicles. A tow truck can't even go just pick up any vehicle unless he's got orders to it from like the city asks them to pick one up that's not parked in the right spot. Then the city is ordering that and they got jurisdiction. But I couldn't say my neighbor's car is parked in front of my house, move it. Tow truck can move it. He's not going to do it. He wants the registered owner to be. Yeah. The only exceptions to that are, of course, are like multi-unit places where like apartment buildings and stuff, where somebody's parked in they're not their parking spot. They can have the vehicle moved.
Right.
But
this is can you take it? Can you take a vehicle to pay the rent if, let's say they've got two vehicles?
You could some items you can take and you hold on to them for them to come up with the money, and if they don't, then you could sell them. Now, I can say I don't know that whole section. I've never had to do with it. I know it's under civil enforcement. I defer to a civil enforcement agency person to talk about that.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Okay, so here's the 14-day notice. 14-day notice to quit. Same thing, date, to who are the occupants, specifics of the letter, what the infraction is, what the action required is, the names, the dates, the signature of the property owner. That's what
you need the address of the unit and stuff. That I see you don't have that there. If you go to the RTA and to the ministerial section, and that's another act or that's part of the act, they have explicit detail as to what needs to be in a notice. So you follow that. You can make your own, certainly. There are ones that are out there that will be considered official.
Right. So you don't have to buy them. You could just.
No, you don't. You call me and I'll send you one free of charge. You photocopy one, but that's all.
Good stuff. So here we go. This is the picture. I always like pictures of what happens. And Gil's going to go over it with you.
One more page.
One more page over. So,
All right. So you've got your 14-day notice. Now, was the reason for the notice unpaid rent? And if it was not, if it's not unpaid rent, then the tenant can serve the landlord with an objection, or the tenant can move out. If the tenant chooses to object, they can stay in the property, and the landlord will have to make an application against the tenant. So now it's going to go to RTDRS. If the reason was unpaid rent, then the tenant can pay the rent that is owed and stay within the property, or the tenant can move out. Those are the choices.
so that's basically how that works.
Yeah.
I won't do that one because we sort of talked about that already. Don already talked about the eviction services. We had a few questions that were kind of emailed in that I'd like to go over, and most of them involve asking Don. We should have called this Ask Don Almost Anything rather than Ask Don.
Okay. I'm
All
up for
right.
that.
Okay. Well, I think you kind of answered this one already. Ethan from Lethbridge said, what's the main difference between doing the eviction with the RTDRS on your own and going through an eviction service?
Well, there is, we didn't really talk about all of that. I mean, I talked about what I do, but what would I offer? What would be the value added that I could do? And I bring that down to presentation. Certainly how you apply makes a difference. If you're scattered, you don't have your stuff in a row, your ducks in a row. That's the first part. And I've seen people, I've had people come to me with, I've applied at the RTDRS and they keep sending it back to me and I don't know what I've done wrong. Send it to me, pay me some money and I'll look after it for you. I never, almost never, sometimes I get a phone call about something, but very seldom. Usually I get my stuff back in a couple hours. That's the biggest thing. They're presenting on the application and then presenting at the hearing. We understand what the rules are. We're applying, we're presenting it to showcase what parts of the section 21, which is most of the graph you had at the beginning there with all the different things ending with leave on time. And that's point by point A to G of section 21. And so we're going to highlight those things out. And often if we see problems with other parts of what the landlord's going after, the tenant may have some comebacks and maybe have muddy the waters. We will try and make that simple. If the biggest thing is they owe $3,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 in rent, we're going to say we're only going to go in based on section 21A, pay the rent on time, which they obviously haven't done, and we got enough ammo to get an eviction for that. So there's other stuff that's going to muddy the water. You're not even going to discuss that. So it's right at the beginning, we're presenting it right, we're giving it right, and then at the end, when we at the hearing, we're gearing everything towards our goals, so that at the end, the judge is more likely to be in our favor.
Right.
Unless, of course, I got a word that lied to me or something.
So to my way of thinking, and I've heard this before, like if you don't know what you're doing as a landlord and you just try to go to take on the eviction process yourself, and you fill out forms incorrectly or do whatever else is wrong, you can end up having the tenant for a couple more months where you don't have any income just because you don't know what you're doing, as opposed to hiring it out to someone who does know what they're doing and just getting it done right the first time.
Yeah, and also I think
it's
easy for landlords too to get very emotional during a hearing, and
Yes.
like you said,
Yeah.
say all kinds of irrelevant information that's got nothing to do with the end goal. The judges are only looking at one thing, one reason to move that person out. They only want the supporting documentation for that. They don't want to hear everything. So I think it's easier to, if you're somewhat removed from the situation by hiring somebody, a professional service, to have them go in and present on your behalf. Unless you really love to do stuff like
Yeah.
that, in case more power to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, doing it yourself and making those mistakes is a wonderful way to learn because you'll never forget those mistakes.
True.
And one of the things that, yeah, and one of the things though that I can offer, or one of the things that I know that helps the process a lot is I know when to shut up.
Yeah, you've been married a long time too, haven't you, Don?
Yeah, 47 years. Yeah, 47. Same
See?
wife too.
Yeah.
Same woman. Yeah.
See what you've learned from multiple situations. Same advice.
Yeah. Mhm.
That's great. So
Okay.
I have one more question that I'll ask, and then there are a couple that Gil got as well. So we've got Jean from Waterloo. She said, how much does an eviction cost with a professional eviction service? Or is that
Well, first I'm going to, yeah, what's the cost of not evicting? If you have, you know, say $1,000 rent and you've gone a couple of months without rent, how long can you sustain that? You know, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, you know, that's $6,000 maybe. Is utilities involved? You're supposed to be paying utilities, so now you're out that much money if your, you know, utilities are on your plate. And the other thing is opportunity costs. People don't think about opportunity costs. So if you're spending money on a tenant that isn't paying because you're paying his bills that he's supposed to be paying you, then that money could have been used for something else. So you've lost that opportunity, and there's a interest rate to that you can put if you figured it out if you wanted to. So if you do it yourself, the cost is a $75 application fee, and time. We find that on average, an average case will involve somewhere between 6 and 8 hours. Some are certainly a lot less than that. They're very cut and dried, and then usually those are the ones I get from property management companies. They got all their ducks in a row, and it's wham bam, we got it in, and you got all the information we need, just the information we need, not a bunch of other stuff we got to weed through. If you hire a lawyer, if you can find a lawyer that does this, there's not a lot, there's a few that do. I have lawyers that hire me for their clients. They get the stuff from their client and send it to me, and I deal with the lawyer. So I don't know what they're charging them, but I certainly get my rate. And I know from people that have gone with a lawyer, it's between $2,000 and $4,000.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I charge at this point in the world, I charge $750 for an eviction, and that's from today up to the bailiff. I do all that work. If we're doing a damage claim, which is something we haven't even talked about, but if we're doing a damage claim, I charge $895 for that. This is a lot more work, and you got to try and find some of these tenants, which can be difficult. So there it gives you an idea of what it could cost you, and certainly not doing anything is the most costly.
Yeah.
Right.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah. That's very true. Okay. Then Gil's got these 3 questions. I don't know if we have time for all of them. We might. It's up to you.
How are we doing? I think we're okay. Oh, here's a this might be a fun one. What's the weirdest eviction you ever did?
Weirdest. Well, I guess it's the definition of weird. I've had lots of different ones. I had a woman on meth that we had evicted her, and then she had to come get her stuff. And then when I came back to close up the unit, she was hiring a kite and threatened to stab me in the head. And she picked up a couch all by herself, just a 110-pound woman.
Gosh.
Picked up a couch and threw it out the door.
Oh, wow.
And so I got it around on the other side of a couch. And I'm not a little guy, but I'm not immune to a knife. She had one. Anyway, I called the police, and they fixed that up pretty good. There's lots of I have had guys hiding in closets and one time behind the door in the bathroom, stark naked. All kinds of things there. I had one that another one where the lady was coming back to get her stuff. We had evicted her, changed the locks and everything, and she'd come back and get the stuff, and I had let her in, and And anyway, I come back and she had consumed most of a bottle of whiskey and was sitting in a corner, and she told me in no uncertain terms that I could go to hell. She wasn't leaving. So I waited her out till she ran out of cigarettes, and then I told her I'd drive her down, and then she said, "Would you buy me cigarettes?" And I says, "Well, first off, I quit smoking quite a few years ago, and if anybody wants cigarettes, they can buy their own goddamn cigarettes. If you want, though, I'll drive you over to the store." And she said, "Yeah, okay." So that's how I got it back. Anyway, when I had a tenant that he was there was something really wrong with him. He was very loud and abusive, both him and his girlfriend, and he had claims that the landlord was crawling through. He's in the basement suite. Picture this. He's in the basement suite. That the landlord was crawling in the ceiling and running cameras.
Okay. Okay.
Time with that. I mean, what do you got, about 3.5 inches? The landlord wasn't that smart.
No.
Anyway, yeah, he was a handful. But when it came right down to it, after he lost the court case, we figured we're going to have a bailiff for sure, and he was gone. Him and his girlfriend disappeared. So
Wow.
Good one, yeah.
And he has a girlfriend. He sounds like he'd be a lot of fun to live with.
She was as crazy as he was.
Oh, gee.
And that was the second time I evicted him.
Wow. And then from across the room, their eyes met. Yeah.
I did one lady 4 times.
Oh, a frequent
4
flyer.
times, yeah.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
4 different owners. You think about this, that's 4 different owners that happened to pick me to evict for her. And I know there's ones in between. This was over a 2-year period.
Wow.
She went at least 2 years without paying rent. And then after the last one, I got a phone call from a guy, and he's complaining about this woman. And I said, "Is it this lady?" And he says, "Yes, that's her name." "You tell her that you were speaking to Don Gray." He phoned me about a week later, and he says, "I didn't know anybody could move out that fast."
Oh, that's excellent.
You didn't want to do a 5th time with me.
Oh, that's great. Wow.
Yeah,
You think she would take,
answered
yeah,
all
we
of
think
the
we've answered all of our questions. So resources, where can you find resources on evictions? You can, I keep bringing these up, but I really like the landlord tenant municipal associations like Calgary Residential Rental Association. I actually at one point did a whole lookup of all the different areas in Canada, and just about every city has their own nonprofit landlord tenant association. And I think they're excellent. So you can get a lot of resources from them. You can also ask them questions. They'll give you really good answers. Service Alberta, there's the RTA, Residential Tenancies Act handbook. And then Don, what's your, if someone wants to get hold of you to ask you questions or hire you, what do they do?
There's several ways. Certainly they can call me. My cell phone is my business phone. We've got a phone there too, but I advertise mine. It's 780-974-8427. So you can call me day or evening. I don't mind. I'm an owner. I know what it's about. On my website, they can look me up on the website is edmontonevictionservices.com. And actually, you can get some free forms. There's a 14-day notice and some other forms that you can get off my website free of charge. And certainly, you can send me an email to dawn@edmontonevictionservices.com.
That's brilliant. Okay.
Yeah.
Tim, do you have any more questions? While we're still here for next time?
Dawn, I need you. Welcome.
Oh, no questions from me.
Okay. All right.
Thanks for being here, Tim.
Yeah.
It's
Tim,
my pleasure.
And we've got a few ghost people, which is fun. And
Do we have some ghost people?
yes. Yeah. People don't want to identify themselves, totally fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so in summary, what we covered today, we just covered the process outlined by the RTA for ending a tenancy if you do it yourself. Don talked about his eviction process. And then we talked about, before you take any action at all, just ask yourself those 2 questions.
Do I want this tenant?
Do I want them? Do I want to keep them or do I want to work with them? So that's basically it. Hope you learned something tonight.
That's
Thumbs up would be
beauty.
good, or make a comment on the Facebook page or Twitter or LinkedIn. And then shameless plug for my own services here. Do you have the proper landlord forms? Because when you're moving people in, that's usually the part that I take care of. So I've got 10 essential editable landlord forms you can get on my website, which is neldaschulte.com. And they'll help you separate the good tenants from the bad. So the next session that we're going to talk about is going to be about getting a good tenanting in a property, because the best defense is the best offense.
Yeah.
So I have a very
If you do that end right, you won't need me.
exactly.
That's correct.
So we always tell tenants, this is the last thing I'm going to end with. You can either choose to do a whole lot of work on the front end, which is what we do with our tenants. We've always done with our property management tenants. And you circumvent 98% of your bad problems. You get mostly good tenants. You can usually tell from, if you've got a very thorough process, you're going to have a good experience with them and you can work with them and they're going to be polite, respectful, and pay on time. If you skip that process, you're going to be hiring down on the back end. So it's your call what you want to do. And I hope that you choose to be offensive and keep educating yourself, which is a brilliant thing to do and the best thing to do.
Good tenants generate revenue.
Yeah.
Bad tenants cost revenue.
Yeah, you want your life to be interesting and your tenants to be boring. That's the way we like them. So John, I want to thank you very much for joining us tonight. You are a font and wealth of information and a great storyteller.
Yes.
And really appreciated having you here. And I want to thank all of our guests for joining us. And if you'd like to join us again next week, we'd love to see you again, 7 p.m. And we're going to call it a night. Have yourself a wonderful evening.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Great meeting you.